The air in the Memphis Mega-Mall thrummed a living, breathing beast of noise and anticipation. It was a Saturday, which usually meant a decent crowd, but today was different. Today, a rumor had swept through the city like wildfire. Elvis Presley, the king himself, was rumored to be making an appearance, not for a concert, not for a signing, just an appearance. Maybe he was shopping, maybe visiting a friend's new store. Nobody knew for sure. But the whisper had been enough. Hordes of people, from teenagers in their best poodle skirts and slick-back hair to grandmothers with their sensible handbags, packed the vast concourses. The mall's polished floors, usually reflecting the bright fluorescent lights in an orderly grid, now mirrored a swirling kaleidoscope of faces, colors, and urgent movements. The scent of popcorn, mixed with cheap perfume and the faint metallic tang of too many bodies in one space. Every echo seemed to multiply, conversations becoming a roaring surf, footsteps a relentless drum. In the midst of this glorious chaos was Sarah Miller, her hand clamped tightly around her 6-year-old son, Timmy. Timmy, small for his age, had wide, curious eyes that darted everywhere. He wore a little denim jacket a size too big and clutched a worn teddy bear named Barnaby. Sarah had promised him a new comic book from the bookstore on the second floor, a treat for doing so well in school. She'd tried to avoid the mall today, sensing the strange energy even before she left the house. But Timmy had been so excited now she regretted it. "Mommy, look, is that him? Is that Elvis?" Timmy's voice was a high-pitched squeak, barely audible above the din as he pointed a finger towards a distant knot of people near the central fountain. The knot was growing, sucking in more and more bodies like a black hole pulling in stars. Sarah strained her neck, trying to see over the bobbing heads. "I don't know, sweetie. It's too many people. Let's just get your comic book and go home. Okay." She tightened her grip on his hand, her palm growing sweaty. The crowd was pressing in now, a wall of bodies moving with an unstoppable momentum. She felt small, vulnerable, her heart starting to beat a little faster. This wasn't just a crowd. It was a living organism, unpredictable and overwhelming. She tried to steer Timmy towards a less congested route, aiming for the quieter escalator that led up to the bookstore, but the current of people was too strong. They were being carried along, jostled from side to side. A woman with a giant hat inadvertently bumped into Sarah, nearly knocking her off balance. Sarah stumbled, her grip on Timmy's hand momentarily loosening. "Timmy, hold on," she cried, a rising note of panic in her voice. Crowd had already surged forward, a swift, powerful wave. When she regained her footing, pushing through the immediate crush, Timmy wasn't there. Her stomach dropped. 1 second he was right beside her, small and eager. The next, he was gone, swallowed by the human tide. She spun around frantically, searching, her eyes wide with terror. "Timmy, where are you?" People looked at her, some with fleeting pity, most with blank expressions, as they continued their relentless push towards the rumored sighting of the king. The air seemed to thicken, pressing in on her, stealing her breath. Chest tightened, a cold dread spreading through her veins. He was so small, so trusting, and she had let go just for a second. Meanwhile, a few levels above, shielded somewhat from the main surge by a phalanx of discreetly dressed security, Elvis Presley himself was having a moment of profound regret. He had only popped into the mall for a new watch strap, a quick errand before heading to the studio. He told his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, "It would be fine. Nobody's going to recognize me in my shades, Colonel. It's just a mall." He'd been wrong, terribly, utterly wrong. The whispers had obviously preceded him, and now the mall felt less like a shopping center and more like a besieged fortress. Fans' eyes wide with adoration and a touch of mania pressed against the invisible barrier his security team formed. He could hear his name, a constant chant, a desperate plea. He kept his head down, offering a small practice smile and a wave every now and then, trying to be gracious, without feeling the frenzy. But it was getting out of hand. The sheer volume of people, the way they moved almost as one, was unnerving. He saw a young woman crying, pressed against a shop window. A kid looked pale, clinging to his father's leg. It wasn't right, This wasn't fun for anyone. "Colonel, we gotta go. This ain't safe," Elvis murmured, his voice low, almost swallowed by the noise. He adjusted his dark sunglasses, trying to peer through the gaps in the crowd. His security detail, burly men in suits, were doing their best, but they looked strained. Just then, above the collective hum, above the excited shrieks and the insistent murmurs of his name, a sound pierced through the chaos. It was a high, thin wail, a sound of pure, unadulterated fear. It was followed by a woman's frantic, desperate cry. "Timmy, my son, he's lost." Elvis paused, his head snapped up, turning towards the sound. It was coming from down below, near the central area. His blue eyes, usually calm and assessing behind his dark lenses, narrowed, his jaw tightened. He could feel the panic in that voice, even over the din. It was the sound of a mother's worst nightmare. He had a mama, he knew that love, and he had a deep personal empathy for anyone hurting. His manager, Colonel Parker, ever the pragmatist, was already trying to steer him towards a service exit. "Elvis, it's not our concern. We need to go now before someone gets hurt." But Elvis stood rooted to the spot, a sudden stillness coming over him that was almost palpable even amidst the swirling crowd. He felt unsettling feeling. He imagined his own mother, Gladys, in such a situation, or even a child of his own. Sunday, no, he couldn't just leave, not with that sound echoing in his ears. He saw her then, a young woman, her face pale with terror, pushing against the flow of the crowd, tears streaming down her face as she continued to scream for her child. She was utterly alone in her panic, swallowed by the indifferent tide of celebrity worshippers. "No," Colonel Elvis said, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through the manager's urgent whispers. He started to move, not towards the exit, but towards the edge of the railing, trying to get a clearer view of the distressed mother. "Someone is hurt, and they need help." The mall was a blur of faces, a deafening echo chamber. Sarah was screaming Timmy's name, her throat raw, her voice hoarse. No one heard her, or if they did, they couldn't help. The crowd was a solid wall, impenetrable, uncaring. Every passing second felt like an hour. Her mind raced, conjuring terrible scenarios. What if he wandered outside? What if he got trampled? Tears streamed down her face, blurring the already indistinct shapes around her. She was pushing, shoving, elbowing through the throng, but she was going against the current, making painfully slow progress. Her hands trembled as she clutched at air, desperately, hoping to find something, anything belonging to Timmy Barnaby, his little teddy bear. She wished she had never brought him here. She wished she had stayed home. Meanwhile, on the second floor, high above the frantic mother, Elvis had made his decision. He couldn't just walk away. The raw agony in that woman's voice had struck a chord deep within him. It reminded him of his own mother's fierce love, her protective instinct. He knew what it was like to feel helpless, but this woman was truly suffering. "Elvis, for God's sake, don't be a fool. We've got a schedule, and this is a public safety hazard," Colonel Parker hissed, his face red with frustration, trying to physically pull Elvis away. His security detail, usually impassive, looked anxious, their eyes darting nervously between the surging crowd and their unpredictable client. But Elvis was focused. He shrugged off the colonel's hand. "Colonel, if my mama was in trouble, I'd want someone to help her." His voice was low, but carried an authority that even Parker, for all his bluster, rarely argued with directly. He stepped forward, pushing gently past his security, moving towards the wide-open atrium that looked down onto the main floor. The crowd below was a swirling mass, all eyes fixed on the distant promise of his presence. He took a deep breath, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath with him. Then, in a voice that somehow miraculously cut through the cacophony, he called out, not with his usual stage roar, but with a clear, resonant tone that carried a surprising weight. "Listen, listen to me, everybody." It was like a switch had been flipped. The sheer unexpectedness of his clear, amplified voice, without a microphone, silenced the immediate vicinity. Heads turned, people stopped pushing. A ripple of quiet spread outwards from where he stood, as if a stone had been dropped into a noisy pond. "There's a lady down there," he continued, pointing a steady finger toward Sarah, who was still frantically calling out, oblivious to the sudden eerie hush beginning to fall around her. "She's lost her child, a little boy named Timmy." His voice, known to millions from records and radio, now carried a different kind of power. It wasn't about entertainment or fame, it was about urgency, about human connection. The immediate crowd around him had hushed completely, their faces upturned, a mixture of awe and confusion. They were listening. The king was speaking to them. Slowly, like a wave receding, the noise, level in the mall, began to drop. Collective roars softened to a murmur, then to a whisper, then to an almost complete silence. Thousands of eyes, which moments before had been frantic with excitement, were now wide with a shared sense of gravity. People began to turn, looking for the woman Elvis had indicated. Sarah, still in her isolated bubble of despair, finally noticed the strange shift. The noise had died down. She looked up, her tear-filled eyes scanning the faces around her. And then she saw him. On the second floor, standing at the railing, impossibly tall and commanding even from a distance, was Elvis Presley. He was looking right at her, his expression one of deep concern. He pointed at her again, confirming to the silent, watchful crowd who he was talking about. "This lady needs our help. She's lost her son, Timmy. He's a little boy, maybe 6 years old, wearing a denim jacket. He might have a teddy bear with him." His voice, though unamplified, seemed to carry to every corner of the vast atrium. The crowd, which had moments before been a surging, chaotic force, was now strangely still, almost reverent. This wasn't a performance. This was real. This was a man, a legend, asking them to stop and care. Sarah felt a surge of something she hadn't expected. Hope. She hadn't even known he was in the mall, much less that he would stop for her. A faint, almost imperceptible nod passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of shared humanity. "If anyone sees Timmy, please find a mall employee, or call out, or bring him to this lady," Elvis continued, his voice resonating with an earnest plea. "Let's all help find this little boy. Let's make this mall a safe place for everybody." The transformation was astonishing. The mob, so recently a threat, now seemed to coalesce into something resembling a community. People began to whisper, not in excitement but in determination. Faces that had been pressed into a single-minded pursuit of a celebrity now scanned the ground, eyes searching for a small boy in a denim jacket. The atmosphere had shifted from frenzy to focus, from chaos to quiet resolve. All because a man known for his voice and his hips had chosen to use his influence for something truly important. Sarah, tears still streaming, felt a fragile bubble of gratitude forming in her chest. A stranger, a superstar, was using his incredible power to help her. It was an almost unbelievable act of kindness. She looked around, and this time when her eyes met other people's, she saw not indifference, but concern. The mall was still packed, but now it felt different. It felt like they were all in this together. The sudden unnatural quiet that descended upon the mall was more profound than any roar. It wasn't just the cessation of noise. It was the cessation of frenzied movement. 1,000 people who had been pushing and shoving moments before now stood still, their gazes fixed, first on Elvis, then on Sarah, and then, slow Frabling could finally breathe. The immediate pressure of the crowd had eased. She could see now, really see, the faces around her. Some looked sympathetic, some curious, some simply wide-eyed in the presence of Elvis, but all of them were listening. Elvis, from his vantage point on the second floor, scanned the main level. His brow was furrowed, his eyes sharp and analytical. He wasn't just looking for a small boy, he was looking for patterns, for logical places a scared child might go. He was surprisingly calm, the celebrity persona completely shed, replaced by a focused, determined individual. Colonel Parker, still beside him, looked utterly flabbergasted. "Elvis, this is madness. You're putting yourself at risk." And your reputation? What if the boy isn't found? What if this turns into a disaster? My reputation, Colonel, isn't worth a lost child's safety, Elvis retorted, his voice low but firm. He didn't even look at Parker. His gaze was fixed on the concourse below, already starting to shift as people began their new mission. We ain't leaving until that boy is safe with his mama. He turned to his head of security, a burly, no-nonsense man named Bill. Bill, get some of the mall security. Fast. Tell them what's happening. We need to cordon off areas. Check restrooms. Empty stores, and make sure nobody leaves without checking. Nobody should be taking pictures right now. Bill, this is serious. Bill, surprised by Elvis's directness and authority in such an unexpected situation, nodded instantly. Yes, Mr. Presley, right away. He barked orders into a walkie-talkie, his usual stoicism replaced by a sense of urgency. Meanwhile, on the ground floor, Sarah had started to move more deliberately, her frantic calls for Timmy replaced by a quieter, more focused search. She was still terrified, but Elvis's intervention had given her a lifeline, a glimmer of hope. People were now stepping aside for her, pointing vaguely in directions, offering hushed words of encouragement. He was just here by the fountain, she managed to tell a concerned young couple who had stopped to help. He loves that fountain. He always tries to throw a coin in. Elvis, overhearing through the surprising quiet, relayed this information to Bill. Check the fountain area first, Bill, and any hiding spots nearby. Little kids like small spaces. He then did something unexpected, pulled out a folded handkerchief from his pocket and tossed it down to a woman standing near Sarah. Could you give this to the lady for her tears? It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes about his deep empathy. The woman, eyes wide, caught a handkerchief and immediately handed it to Sarah, who clutched it like a lifeline. The search began in earnest. It was unlike anything the mall had ever seen. Thousands of shoppers, usually consumed by their own errands, were now united by a single purpose. Teenagers on dates whispered to each other, scanning under benches. Mothers with their own children held their hands tighter but also bent down, peering into display windows, checking behind potted plants. Elvis remained on the second floor, his presence a focal point, a calming influence. He directed people with subtle hand gestures, his eyes constantly moving. He seemed to know instinctively where to look, where a child might go. He asked if there were any quiet corners, any less trafficked areas, any employee-only zones that a small, curious child might stumble into. He wasn't performing, he was leading. His usual swagger was replaced by a quiet intensity. He was no longer the king of rock and roll. He was just a man deeply concerned about a lost child. The crowd sensed this shift, and their respect for him deepened even further. This wasn't a publicity stunt. This was real. A mall security guard, a burly man named Frank who had been overwhelmed just minutes earlier, approached Elvis slightly out of breath. Mr. Presley, we've got teams fanning out. Checked the restrooms, the toy store, the food court, nothing yet. His voice was hushed, reverent. Okay, Frank, think like a kid, Elvis said, surprisingly cheerful. Where would a kid go if they were scared? Not where the crowds are. Somewhere quiet, somewhere to hide. Maybe a quiet bench, or a back corner of a big store, or even try the staff areas. If he was really scared and looking for help. Elvis's eyes continued to sweep the vast expanse of the mall. The organized search had begun, but the vastness of the place was daunting. Thousands of square feet, multiple levels, endless nooks and crannies. The seconds ticked by, each one stretching into an unbearable eternity for Sarah. But Elvis's steady presence, his unwavering focus somehow radiated a quiet reassurance. He wasn't leaving. And neither were they. The search for Timmy had become a shared mission, orchestrated by the most unlikely of leaders. The minutes stretched heavy and anxious. For Sarah, it felt like her heart was beating outside her chest, exposed and vulnerable to the world. She continued to walk, calling Timmy's name in a quieter, more desperate tone. Now, her eyes raking every corner, every shadow. The mall, though quieter still, felt like a labyrinth. Up on the second floor, Elvis was a beacon of calm in the storm. His initial commanding presence had settled into a steady, watchful determination. He had given up trying to be discreet. His sunglasses were off, revealing his clear blue eyes, intense and unwavering. He spoke to Bill, to mall security, to passing fans who offered their help, always politely, always focused on the task at hand. Are there any areas where a child might try to hide if they were scared of the crowd? Elvis asked Frank, the mall security guard, who was now communicating via walkie-talkie and relaying information back to the king. Like maybe knew the back of a large department store or a stockroom door that might have been left ajar? Frank frowned thoughtfully. Well, there's a few less trafficked areas. The old loading dock entrance by the back of Macy's is usually quiet. And there's a small employee break room entrance by the service elevators on the lower level. Usually locked, but sometimes staff are in and out. And tell your men to look low. A scared kid might crawl under a display or hide behind something big. He was thinking like a child, imagining the world from that perspective. He remembered his own childhood, growing up in Tupelo, then Memphis. Times he'd felt small and lost, even when he wasn't physically separated from his parents. The instinct to find a safe, quiet space when the world felt too big. His eyes scanned the ground floor again, lingering on the large decorative planters scattered throughout the mall. The oversized benches, the nooks between stores. He imagined a small, frightened boy, overwhelmed by the noise and the sudden separation, seeking refuge. Meanwhile, Timmy was indeed scared. He had stumbled, lost his grip on his mom's hand, and then suddenly he was alone. The crowd had swallowed her up. He'd called out, but no one seemed to hear. The noise had been too much, the faces too many, too unfamiliar. His little heart had thumped like a hummingbird's wings. He had pushed his way through, trying to get back to where he thought his mom was. But the flow of people carried him away. He was jostled, bumped. His teddy bear Barnaby was clutched so tightly that his knuckles were white. He just wanted to be invisible. He wanted the noise to stop. He wanted his mom. He spotted a gap, a shadowy space between a large potted palm and a deserted display of mannequins dressed in shimmering evening wear. It looked quiet. It looked safe. He squeezed through, feeling the rough bark of the palm tree against his back, and hunkered down. The sound of the mall was muffled here like a distant roar. He pulled his knees up to his chin, burying his face in Barnaby's soft fur. Tears welled up in his eyes, silent hot rivers running down his cheeks. He sniffled, trying to be brave, trying to remember what his mom always said about being strong. But it was hard, so very hard. He heard muffled voices, and then a distinctive one. A deep, resonant rumble that made him peek out from his hiding spot. It was coming from the loudspeaker, not directly above him, but from the mall's central system, strangely clear. His name broadcast over the entire mall. A strange mix of relief and fear washed over him. Relief because they knew he was lost. Fear because now everyone would be looking. He didn't want to be seen. He just wanted his mom. He burrowed deeper into his hiding spot, making himself as small as possible. Elvis, hearing the mall's official announcement, felt a flicker of hope. At least now the entire mall was aware. The urgency was palpable. He watched as more security guards joined the search, moving through the crowd with purpose. Shoppers, no longer just listening, were actively participating, their heads swiveling, their eyes scanning. A thought struck him. The silence he had commanded earlier, the sheer scale of it, might be just as frightening to a small child as the initial chaos. If Timmy was truly scared, he might be trying to avoid attention, even helpful attention. He wouldn't come out if he heard his name called out by strangers, or if he saw people actively looking for him. He'd hide even deeper. He quickly spoke to Frank. "Frank, tell your men to move slower, quieter. No more shouting his name on the loudspeaker. A scared kid might be too frightened to come out if he hears all that. Just gentle searching. Look for anything out of place. A small shoe, a glimpse of blue denim." Elvis leaned against the railing, his heart aching for the small, frightened boy. He knew what it felt like to be overwhelmed, but never like this. He imagined Timmy huddled somewhere, terrified and alone. He wanted to find him, not just for the mother, but for the boy himself. He wanted to tell him it was okay, that everything was going to be all right. The minutes dragged on, each one an eternity for Sarah. She felt a profound emptiness in her arms, a phantom weight where Timmy should have been. Her mind kept replaying the moment she lost him, the brief slip of her hand. Guilt was a heavy cloak suffocating her. She was surrounded by thousands of people, yet felt utterly, terribly alone. Up on the second floor, Elvis was a study in controlled tension. He moved from one spot to another, along the railing, his eyes constantly sweeping the vast space below. His face, usually expressive and full of a mischievous charm, was now etched with a deep concern that was almost painful to witness. He wasn't just performing an act of charity, he was genuinely invested. He thought of his own childhood growing up with little money, but always surrounded by love, especially from his mother, Gladys. He knew what it meant to be loved fiercely, to be protected, and he knew the primal fear of losing something precious. He had seen the look on Sarah's face, a look of pure, unadulterated terror, and it had burrowed deep into his soul. "Any word, Frank?" Elvis asked, his voice tight. Mall Security Chief Frank had returned, looking grim. "Nothing, Mr. Presley. We've checked every store, every public area, even the back halls. It's like he vanished." A cold knot formed in Elvis's stomach. The mall was huge. It was possible the boy had found a way out, or no, he wouldn't go there. He refused to let his mind go to the darkest possibilities. "He's got to be here," Elvis murmured, more to himself than to Frank. "Kids don't just disappear. If he's scared, he's hiding somewhere quiet, somewhere small." Closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to clear his mind of the frantic energy that still lingered in the air. He needed to think, he needed to be calm. He opened his eyes, and they landed on the central fountain again, the one Sarah had mentioned Timmy loved. He remembered her saying Timmy always tried to throw a coin in. Kids are drawn to water, to light, to things that sparkle. But also, if scared, they'd hide near something familiar. He scanned the immediate vicinity of the fountain. There were large, decorative planters, benches, and those elaborate store displays. His gaze lingered on a particularly gaudy display of evening wear, shimmering dresses on mannequins framed by a large, leafy potted palm. It was tucked away slightly out of the main flow of traffic, a small island in the vast sea of the mall. It struck him then. A small child, overwhelmed by the crowd, would instinctively seek out a quiet, enclosed space. Not necessarily a dark one, but somewhere they felt safe, unseen. That particular display with the palm tree and the mannequins might offer just such a spot. It was visually busy, a good place to blend in if you were small. "Frank," Elvis said, his voice quiet, a sudden intensity in his eyes, "tell the teams to focus on the quieter spots near the central fountain. Specifically, look behind that large palm tree by the formal wear display, the one with the sparkly dresses." Frank looked at him, slightly puzzled. "Mr. Presley, we've had men sweep that area already. It's open." "Just check it again," Elvis insisted, his voice unwavering. "And tell them to look low, like look for a small space hidden from view. A child could squeeze into a surprisingly small area if they're trying to hide." He felt a strange pull towards that spot, a gut instinct. Sarah, driven by a renewed, almost desperate energy, was nearing that very area. She had circled the fountain countless times, her eyes glazed with unshed tears. She heard snippets of the crowd's whispers. "They're still looking. Poor boy. Elvis is helping," but they barely registered. She was in her own world of anguish. She approached the formal wear display, her head down, her shoulders slumped. The light from the store windows reflected off the sequins of the dresses, making them glitter mockingly. She was about to turn away to start her endless circuit again when she paused. Something, a faint, almost imperceptible sound. A tiny sniffle. Her head snapped up. She froze, straining her ears over the faint hum of the mall. Had she imagined it? She waited, holding her breath. Then, a tiny, almost inaudible whimper. It came from behind the large potted palm tucked into the display. Her heart leaped into her throat. "Timmy," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. She took a shaky step forward, moving towards the shadows behind the mannequins. Her hands reached out, parting the large waxy leaves of the palm. And there, huddled in a ball, face buried in a worn teddy bear, was her son. His small shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Timmy, oh Timmy," Sarah cried, a sob of pure relief tearing from her throat. She dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms, clutching him so tightly she could barely breathe. Teddy bear Barnaby was still clutched in his little hand. Timmy, startled by her voice, looked up, his face tear-streaked and smudged. When he saw her, his eyes widened, and he launched himself into her embrace, burying his face in her neck. "Mommy, I was scared, I was so scared," he sobbed, his small body trembling. Sarah rocked him, burying her face in his soft hair, tears of relief mingling with his tears of fear. The world, which had been gray and terrifying moments before, suddenly exploded into a riot of color and joy. He was safe, he was here, he was in her arms. It was the most beautiful moment of her life. From the second floor, Elvis had seen the movement. He'd seen Sarah rush towards that spot, her desperate hope shining through. And then he saw her collapse, not in despair but in relief. He saw the small denim-clad figure emerge from the shadows, pulled into her arms. A wave of pure, unadulterated relief washed over him, so strong it almost made his knees buckle. A genuine, unrestrained smile broke across his face, lighting up his features. He felt a lump in his throat, a warmth spreading through his chest. Clapped his hands together once a sharp, joyous sound had cut through the remaining hush of the mall. "They found him," he called out, his voice ringing with triumph and happiness. "She found him. The boy is safe." Collective gasp, then a wave of sound unlike any before rippled through the mall. It wasn't the frenzied roar of earlier, nor the anxious silence. It was a sound of communal relief, of shared joy, a wave of applause and cheers that rose and swelled, echoing through the vast space. It was a human sound, full of genuine happiness, a true outpouring of emotion. The moment of reunion was a quiet island in the suddenly roaring sea of the mall. Sarah held Timmy so tightly she thought he might pop, but he clung back just as fiercely. His small sobs slowly quieted, replaced by hiccuping breaths, as he buried his face in her shoulder. She smoothed his hair, kissed the top of his head, murmuring reassurances into his ear. "My brave boy, my sweet boy, you're safe now. Mommy's got you." Around them, a circle of quiet formed as people respectfully gave them space. There were tears in many eyes. The shared relief, a powerful, tangible thing. Over the swelling applause, Sarah could hear shouts of, "Thank you, Elvis," and "Long live the king." She looked up, her eyes still blurred with tears, and saw him. Elvis Presley, standing on the second floor, a genuine joyful smile lighting up his face. He looked directly at her, and his smile broadened, giving her a small, gentle nod. It was a silent acknowledgement, a shared moment between two people who had just been through an ordeal. His hand instinctively went to his chest, a gesture of profound relief. Timmy, feeling the change in his mother's grip, looked up, his tear-filled eyes blinking. He followed her gaze, and then he saw him too. The man on the second floor, the one whose voice had been on the loudspeaker, the one everyone was cheering for. He remembered overhearing people talking about Elvis Presley. He looked just like the pictures in the newspapers. "Mommy, is that Elvis? We're so glad he's safe." "Thank you," Sarah choked out, still clutching Timmy. "Thank you all so much." Then, through the clearing in the crowd, a tall, imposing figure emerged. It was Elvis making his way down the escalator, surrounded by his security team, but moving with a clear, determined purpose towards them. The crowd parted respectfully, their cheers now muted to a reverent hush as he approached the family. He moved with a quiet grace, his eyes fixed on Timmy. When he reached them, he knelt down, getting to eye level with the small boy. His famous blue eyes, so often seen twinkling with charisma on stage, were now soft, filled with a deep, almost paternal concern. "Well, hello there, young man," Elvis said, his voice surprisingly gentle and warm, a stark contrast to the powerful stage voice that had filled the mall earlier. "You gave your mama quite a scare, didn't you?" Timmy, shy and still a little overwhelmed, clutched Barnaby tighter and buried his face in Sarah's side. But he peeked out, stealing a glance at the man who was talking to him. "It's okay, Timmy," Elvis continued, holding out a hand, palm up in a gesture of peace and invitation. "You're safe now, and your mama's got you." He glanced at Sarah, his eyes conveying a silent reassurance. "You were very brave to hide and stay put, son. That was smart." Timmy's eyes widened slightly. Brave. Smart. He had just been scared. But Elvis Presley, the Elvis Presley, was telling him he was brave. Slowly, tentatively, he reached out a small hand and touched Elvis's outstretched palm. A fleeting feather-light touch. Elvis smiled. A genuine, heartwarming smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "That's a good boy now. You hold on to your mama real tight. Okay, and don't you let go." "Ma'am, I am so sorry you had to go through this. I'm just glad we could help." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief, not the one he'd thrown earlier, and offered it to her. "For those tears, ma'am, you did real good." Sarah took the handkerchief, her hands trembling. "Mr. Presley, I don't know how to thank you. You didn't have to do any of this. You were so kind. You stopped everything." Her voice trailed off. Overcome with emotion, Elvis waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense, ma'am. Any decent person would have done the same. A child lost. That's a universal call for help. I just happened to be in a position where folks listened." He looked out at the now calmer crowd who watched him with a mixture of awe and respect. It was all these good people here who truly helped. They all listened and they all looked for him. He paused, then added a little softer, "I'm just glad he's back with you. That's the main thing." He glanced down at Timmy again, who was now looking at him with wide, curious eyes, no longer quite so scared. "You take care, young man, and listen to your mama." He gave Timmy a quick, gentle wink. Then, with a final, reassuring nod to Sarah and a quiet word to his security team, Elvis began to move away. Crowd, sensing his departure, began to murmur again, but it was a different kind of murmur now, filled with respect rather than frenzy. They understood that this moment was over, and the private reunion had been witnessed. Sarah held Timmy close, feeling the warmth of his small body against hers. The mall was still a loud, busy place, but the terror was gone, replaced by a profound gratitude, a heartwarming sense of humanity that had shone through the chaos, led by the most unexpected of heroes. She watched Elvis disappear into the respectful crowd, a true king not of music but of compassion. As Elvis walked away, the mall began to slowly return to its normal hum, albeit with a lingering sense of shared experience. The cheers had died down, replaced by murmurs of admiration. People were talking, not about his latest hit record, but about the kindness he had shown. Sarah, still holding Timmy tightly, felt a lightness she hadn't experienced. In what felt like years, her boy was safe. The sheer relief was almost overwhelming. She looked down at Timmy, who was now tracing the pattern on her dress with a small, still trembling finger. He said I was brave. A tiny spark of pride flickered in his eyes. He squeezed Barnaby. He helped us. Sarah hugged him again, deeply grateful. He certainly did. We were very lucky. Mall Security Chief Frank approached them again, a concerned but relieved expression on his face. "Mrs. Miller, is there anything else we can do? Do you need a quiet place to sit? Maybe a glass of water?" "No, thank you, Frank," Sarah said, standing up slowly, still holding Timmy's hand securely. "We just want to go home. But thank you, and please thank all your staff." Everyone was wonderful. As she navigated the now less dense but still busy crowd, people smiled at her. Some even offered a quiet, "Glad he's safe." The shared ordeal had created a temporary, fragile bond between strangers. The mall, usually an anonymous space, had become a place where human connection had triumphed over commercialism and celebrity frenzy. Meanwhile, Elvis was being hustled towards a discreet service exit by a very flustered Colonel Parker. "Elvis, what in the good Lord's name were you thinking? You put yourself in the middle of that mob, and you completely derailed our schedule." We had a meeting with the record execs in less than an hour. Parkus, however, was unfazed. He adjusted his jacket, a serene look on his face. "Colonel, that boy was lost. His mama was scared out of her wits. There ain't no schedule, no record deal, no amount of money that's more important than a child's safety." He stopped just before the service exit, turning to look back towards the now calmer main concourse. "Besides, look what happened. People came together. They helped. They weren't just fans anymore. They were people helping other people. That's more important than anything I could do on a stage, Colonel," Parker sighed, running a hand over his bald head. He knew it was useless to argue with Elvis when he got that look in his eyes. "You're a good man, Elvis," he admitted begrudgingly, "but you're going to give me gray hairs before your time." Elvis just chuckled, a genuine joyful sound. "Already got plenty of them, Colonel. Now let's go. I'm feeling good, ready to sing. Maybe even write a song about a little lost boy and a brave mama." The news of the incident spread like wildfire. By the evening news, every major station in Memphis, and soon beyond, was reporting not just on Elvis Presley's surprise mall appearance, but on his heroic act. The king stops mall for lost child. Elvis, more than just a performer. A heart of gold beneath the gold lame. Newspaper headlines the next day splashed photos of a somber Elvis looking out over the crowd, and a smaller blurry photo of Sarah clutching Timmy. The story focused on his unexpected compassion, his willingness to drop his celebrity facade and genuinely help. For Elvis, the incident was a stark reminder of his humanity, a grounding moment amidst the whirlwind of fame. It wasn't about the applause or the headlines. It was about the look on that mother's face when she found her son, the quiet relief that washed over her. It was about the small, brave boy clutching his teddy bear. It solidified his belief that his fame, while often overwhelming, could also be used for good. He was a performer, yes, but he was also a man from Tupelo, Mississippi, raised with a strong sense of community and compassion. For Sarah and Timmy, the day remained a vivid, emotional memory. Timmy carried the story with him proudly, telling anyone who would listen how Elvis Presley had told him he was brave. Barnaby the teddy bear became even more cherished, a silent witness to a terrifying then heartwarming day. Sarah never forgot the quiet strength of Elvis Presley, the man who had stopped the world for her son. It wasn't just a fleeting act of kindness, it was a profound demonstration of empathy that resonated deeply. It reminded her that even in the most chaotic moments, humanity could shine through, and that sometimes the greatest heroes weren't the ones on stage, but the ones who simply chose to care. The memory of that day, terrifying and beautiful, remained a heartwarming testament to a king who truly had a heart of gold.